Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. It's great to have you with us today. As we broadcast this podcast and get things rolling here today, we are exactly 3 weeks to the day from the Canadian general election, the federal election. And, well, depending on which poll you read, I guess the general consensus here, it's very close. The Nanos polling, which is done usually on a nightly basis, now has the Liberals with about a 5-point lead over the Conservatives, which is interesting because when you want to follow that up with one of the other questions in the Nanos survey, who is the best person, best qualified to lead the country? Carney is at 50%. And Poilievre's at about 34, 35%. Yet the polls for the party are very close. Now, keep in mind also that there are regional differences that come into play here. Other polls have it even closer than the 5-point lead. One or two actually have the Conservatives in the lead. But as I say, you can find a poll pretty much anywhere you want to try to suit your political preference or what you like to see happen. The only poll that we've talked about time and time again, but the only one that counts is on election day. And we certainly look forward to what's happening then. As I'm going back and forth with you on our previous podcast and getting some of the feedback, I know we appreciate that, by the way, when you do take the time to comment or ask questions. One of the questions that we basically get here is we are being inundated with information right now on social media, most certainly on the traditional media outlets, whatever the case might be. And it seems that one of the major concerns right now is how do you separate the fact from the fiction, the BS from the truth in situations like that? Well, I wish I had a fast answer for you. I wish I had an accurate answer to say, just do this and you'll be on the right path. It's very hard to tell. And one of the reasons for that is that the people who are responsible for the misinformation are very good at it because they've had a lot of practice. We've seen this happen in past elections. And we know that it's happening in this election. I mean, even before the writ was dropped and the election was called here, we were told by security agencies in this country that they had solid information that Mark Carney was going to be the target of misinformation by offshore groups, not just groups here within the country, but foreign groups, which is troubling, but not the first time that this happened. We know that some of these foreign agencies, Iran, India, South Korea, Russia, have tried to do this, and we don't know how successfully, I guess, in past elections. So it's no surprise that they're going to dip into this one as well. And we've seen some evidence of this, too. I was looking at some social media posts just the other day with some rather ridiculous accusations about Mark Carney and his past record. But here's a little tip. And I've learned this from years in the business, in radio business, in the broadcasting business, and certainly in podcasting. If there's no attribution to the piece, in other words, if it doesn't say where it came from, what agency it was, or who the author is, pretty good chance it's bogus. Because you can throw anything out there. There's no fact-checking anymore. Zuckerberg on Facebook and of course, Elon and all the others basically say it's a free-for-all. You can put whatever you want, say whatever you want, and nobody's really going to cross-check it. So you can put all the BS you want out there. And there's a lot of BS that's going on out there. And that's troublesome, which is why, to follow up another question, I have been so adamant about security clearances with the politicians and for the people that are seeking office. We've already, in the Canadian election, had, I think it's 5 MPs so far, or potential people running for MP, that have had to drop out for a variety of reasons because some skeletons in their closets were discovered. Again, that's, I think, an indication of just how lousy a job they do of vetting the candidates. But you don't know. And I think we, as voters, have a right to know and a responsibility to know just who we're voting for and that kind of transparency about who their supporters are and how to what extent they're going to actually support them. We already do it at the back end. We demand that all the candidates, successful candidates as well as those unsuccessful, have to tell us where their money comes from. They have to have a very, very detailed accounting of who donates, how much they donate, and we've put limits on that as to what they can and cannot do. But we don't do it in the preamble to the election. We kind of let them do whatever the heck they want, and then we try to sift through that later on. That's wrong, which is one of the reasons why the security clearance is so important. And again, that leads us to why doesn't Pierre Poilievre get his security clearance? And he's come up with some bogus excuses. Oh, it means I won't be able to comment on anything that's going on. Well, that's crap, first of all. First, because if you don't get the security clearance and you don't see the reports, you can't comment on it anyway because you have no factual knowledge of it. So it would only be speculation. And I think in one realm, Poilievre is very comfortable simply speculating and throwing rumors and innuendo out there, knowing that people would have to read the reports to be able to say he's wrong or right or whatever the case might be. So he's got that safety thing. Now, the other element that we've heard from time to time, too, is, come on, Poilievre, he went through the security clearance when he was a member of the Harper government. Well, let me set you straight on that. Security clearances last for 5 years, then they expire. And if you're still in government, you have to go through the whole process again. So it was more than 5 years ago. It was more than 10 years ago that Poilievre was a member of the Harper government. Whatever security clearances he had at the time, they're now invalid. So that's not a legitimate excuse. And we also know that we've been told by security agencies who have done some investigation, and they've had to because of some of the stories we've had over the last 2 or 3 years, that there were foreign entities or agents working on behalf of foreign governments that tried to influence the conservative leadership race, which, of course, ultimately Pierre Poilievre won. Which begs the question, if that happened, and more specifically, it was the agents for the government of India that seemed to have an awful lot of interest and influence, or tried to exert influence anyway, in the conservative leadership vote. Well, we know Poilievre won very handily in that leadership race. Did he benefit from foreign interference? I don't know. I'm not suggesting he did. I'm saying we don't know. There's a question to be raised here. If that was what they were doing, and this is the person that won, how much influence, how much money, how much of the push that they had to try to get Poilievre elected was actually beneficial? It's a good question, and I think we as Canadians need to know that. The other people that are going to be involved in this have already gone through the security clearance, and I guess are looking to be proactive here about what's happening here, with security agencies, and what's going to be happening. We already know that those foreign powers are there. Who do they want to see? Who are they, the puppets on their strings that they want to have in government here? Because it's a good question, because we have to ask ourselves, just who are the supporters and what are their long-term goals here? Is it just to disrupt our democratic process, or is it try to put in place people that they think they can influence or control, as the case might be? Even going way back to the first Donald Trump election, we know from the Mueller report, the much ballyhooed and much condemned Mueller report, one of the elements of that is legitimate is that they know that there was Russian interference. And there's an ongoing question, especially what's going on now, about just how much influence or how much control Vladimir Putin has over Donald Trump, right? This crazy thing about the sanctions that he put in place a week or so ago, the one country, or one of a few countries that didn't get touched was Russia. Why not? Because they're certainly guilty of an awful lot of problems and dumping steel and a number of other things that are going on. Yet no Russian tariffs were put in place right now. Is that because of the influence that Putin exerts over Donald Trump? Good question. We don't want to see it happen here. As we've talked about on past podcasts, we can look to the states and look to other countries and say, see how it's happened there? See how governments have been corrupted there? We don't want that to happen here. Well, one of the ways that we can try to protect ourselves from that is to go through these security clearances so we understand just who is trying to influence and how much influence those people have on the people that are ultimately going to have power and introduce legislation and pass legislation and basically run the country for us. It's an important part of the process that we've let slip, frankly, over the years, and it is important. And there's so many different facets of this. I mean, I'm talking about it at the upper levels, about how much influence they may have over the elected officials. But in exerting that influence, some of these foreign agents can carry out some dastardly concepts and ideas. And we have heard stories of those, documented stories too, about people who are basically innocent citizens who come from other countries and move to Canada, may run for office, even at a municipal level, provincial level, federal level. But those agents try to influence them at that level, or they try to influence their family members. It's blackmail, political blackmail, basically. Basically saying somebody comes from Iran or from India, and we know that there can be influence exerted on them, like, hey, nice family you left back there in India. It'd be a shame if something happened to them. You don't want that to happen? Well, listen, here's what you have to do for us. And it does happen, or the attempt to make that happen is apparently ongoing. And that's what our security officials tell us. So we've got to be aware of this. And we've got to be, I think, cognizant of what needs to be done. And, we always talk about in elections, transparency. We need to know what's going on. We need everybody to be open and honest about that. But any rules, any regulations that are put in place are only as good as how they're enforced. And we're heading into, as we've talked about before, probably the most important federal election in this country's history. And because of the implications and who's going to be running the show and just what's going to be happening. And not all of it is Canadian-centric, of course. There are so many different outside influences now, most importantly, the one from our neighbor to the south. But there are other elements to this, too. Our involvement in NATO, international trade, and on it goes. So we need to have as much information as we can. And we need to be able to, if we can, siphon through the stuff that we're being inundated with, that we see almost on a daily basis, and try to separate the fact from the fiction. And I know that, look, a lot of us have our own biases, that we may have political leanings toward a certain political party or an individual. And you try to be open about that too, and you've got to, I guess, factor that into just what kind of an influence these pieces of information, or disinformation, as it were, are going to have on each and every one of us. So be diligent about this and be open-minded about this. And as I say, when I see people are simply saying, "Well, look at lay off Poilievre. He's got the right to deny this because he's not technically in power yet." Well, that may be true, but I guess the follow-up question to that is, how did he get there? And who is pushing the buttons behind the curtain to make that happen? We don't know at this stage. And I think it's something that we need as Canadians and as voters who try to rise above some of the crap that we see going on in other elections in other countries. We've got to make sure that the rules that we do put in place are going to be effective and, most importantly, enforced, to make sure that we do actually get what we always talk about, that's fair elections and democratic elections, because it doesn't always happen that way. And if we get sloppy and we let our guard down, well, we've only got ourselves to blame, don't we? Well, that's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us once again. Of course, you can catch us on Substack, on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, and, of course, on Blue Sky. So much going on. And so much more that we want to talk about. Stay with us as we go through this process and talk about some of the extraneous influences that are affecting this very important Canadian election. We'll do that in future podcasts. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.